I wasn't looking for my wife when I hit play. I was just killing time, scrolling through a teenager's Facebook video that should have meant nothing to me. The clip was shaky, the kind of thing you'd expect from a kid filming a party with one hand while laughing too loud, music bleeding through cheap speakers, colored lights flashing across faces that didn't matter. I almost kept scrolling. Almost. But something in the background caught my eye. Not the music, not the noise, not the crowd. A movement. Familiar in a way that didn't make sense at first. So I paused it. Rewound. Watched again. The camera swung past a cluster of people near what looked like a backyard patio, maybe 10, 15 feet from whoever was filming. And there she was. Emily. My wife of 12 years, standing under a string of dim white lights, her hair falling exactly the way I'd seen it every morning for over a decade. At first, my brain rejected it. It does that sometimes when reality doesn't line up with what it's supposed to be. I told myself it was someone else. Same height, same hair, same posture. Just a coincidence. But then she turned slightly toward the camera, just enough for the light to catch her face. And there's a moment, a fraction of a second, where recognition doesn't feel like a thought. It feels like a drop. Like something inside your chest just lets go. I leaned closer to the screen, my thumb hovering over the pause button like it could stop more than just a video. The kid filming laughed at something off camera, the image jerked again, and that's when it happened. She leaned in. Not dramatic, not exaggerated. Casual. Familiar. The kind of closeness that doesn't ask for permission because it already has it. The man standing in front of her didn't hesitate. Didn't look surprised. Their faces met for a brief moment that lasted just long enough to erase every version of my life I thought was solid. I froze the frame. Just sat there staring at it, like if I looked long enough, it would change. Like maybe the pixels would rearrange themselves into something I could explain. My living room was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses in on you, makes every small sound feel louder than it should be. The hum of the refrigerator. The faint tick of the wall clock. Normal things. Ordinary things. But none of it felt normal anymore. I replayed the clip. Again. And again. Each time hoping for a different angle, a different interpretation. But the truth didn't shift. It stayed exactly where it was, waiting. Patient. Unbothered by how much I needed it to be something else. Emily had told me she was on a work trip that weekend. Out of town. Meetings, long hours, early mornings. I remembered the way she said it, calm, routine, nothing unusual. And now here she was, in a place I didn't recognize, with people I'd never seen, doing something she never thought I'd witness. Not like this. Not through a random video posted by a teenager who probably didn't even know he just handed me the first crack in my entire life. I didn't shout. I didn't throw my phone. I didn't even move right away. I just sat there, watching a moment that wasn't meant for me, realizing that sometimes the truth doesn't come knocking. Sometimes it shows up in the background, out of focus, waiting for you to notice. I did not close the video. I could not. My thumb hovered over the screen, then pressed play again, slower this time, like if I changed the pace I could change the outcome. The frame moved in small, deliberate motions. The teenager's voice dragged, distorted, every laugh stretched into something unnatural. But the moment stayed the same. Emily leaned in. The man met her halfway. No hesitation. No confusion. Just recognition. I paused again, zoomed in until the image started to break apart into pixels, until her face blurred at the edges but the shape of her was still there, unmistakable. I studied everything I could. The angle of her shoulders. The way her hand rested lightly against his arm, casual, like it belonged there. I had seen that gesture before. Not with him, but with me. Years ago. Back when things felt simpler. My chest felt tight, but not in the way people describe panic. It was quieter than that. Controlled. Like something inside me was locking into place instead of falling apart. I set the phone down on the coffee table, then picked it up again. Almost immediately. My mind was already working, moving ahead of the emotion, trying to make sense of the pieces before they scattered too far. The video had a timestamp. Saturday night, just after 9. I glanced at the calendar in my head. That was yesterday. Emily had texted me around 8:30, said she was heading into a late dinner with clients, that she might not be able to talk much. I remembered the message clearly because I had replied with something simple, something normal. Take your time. Hope it goes well. I swallowed, the memory sitting wrong now, like a line delivered in the wrong scene. I went back to the video and let it play past the moment I could not stop replaying. The camera shifted again, catching glimpses of the house, the people, the environment. It was not a corporate dinner. No suits, no quiet conversations, no polished setting. This was a party. Loud, unstructured, the kind of place where no one is watching carefully enough to notice what matters. Except one person had. Even if he did not realize it. I tapped on the username of the account that posted it. A teenager, maybe 17 or 18, judging by the profile picture. High school sports, group photos, nothing that connected directly to my life. But the location tag caught my attention. It was not out of town. It was less than 20 miles from our house. I stared at that detail longer than I needed to, letting it settle in. She had not just lied about what she was doing. She had lied about where she was entirely. The distance between us last night had not been hundreds of miles. It had been a short drive. Close enough that if I had decided to surprise her, I might have walked right into that scene without warning. I exhaled slowly, leaning back against the couch, eyes still fixed on the screen. There is a difference between suspecting something and seeing it. Suspicions can be explained away. Adjusted. Softened. But seeing it removes that option completely. It leaves you with something solid. Something that does not care how you feel about it. I picked up the phone again and started the video from the beginning, this time not looking for the moment itself, but for everything around it. The background. The voices. The details I had ignored before. Because whatever this was, it did not start in that single frame. And if I was going to understand it, I needed more than just the part that broke everything. I needed the full picture. I did not rush to confront her. That thought never even fully formed. Instead, I sat there with the phone in my hand, letting the silence stretch out around me, because some part of me understood that once I spoke, once I asked the question out loud, there would be no going back to not knowing. And right then, knowing was already heavy enough. I set the video aside for a moment, and stared at the blank television screen across the room, my reflection faint in the dark glass. It looked like me. Same posture, same face. But something behind the eyes had shifted, like a switch had been flipped without permission. I tried to build a version of reality that made sense. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe the angle was misleading. Maybe there was some context I was missing. People do that when something breaks too cleanly. They look for edges to soften it. But every time I reached for that explanation, my mind pulled me back to the same detail. The way she leaned in. That was not confusion. That was not accidental. That was intention. I picked up my phone again, opened our message thread, and scrolled through the conversation from the night before. Her words sat there, unchanged, calm and ordinary. She had asked if I had eaten dinner. I had told her I ordered takeout, and was probably going to watch a movie. She responded with a simple smiley face, and said she would call me in the morning. There was nothing in those messages that hinted at what I had just seen. No crack. No hesitation. Just the same steady tone she had used for years. I read them again, slower this time, as if the truth might be hidden between the lines. But there was nothing there. That was the part that settled the deepest. Not just what she did, but how easily she carried on afterward, like the two realities did not overlap at all. I leaned forward, elbows resting on my knees, the phone hanging loosely in my hand. 12 years? That number kept coming back to me, not as a memory, but as a measurement. 12 years of routines, shared spaces, quiet mornings, small conversations that built something I thought was solid. I tried to pinpoint when it changed, when the version of her in that video became real, while the version sitting across from me at dinner every night stayed the same. There were signs, I realized. Small ones? Easy to ignore at the time. The way she started taking her phone into another room more often. The late nights that became more frequent. The subtle shift in her attention, like part of her was always somewhere else even when she was right in front of me. I had noticed it, but I explained it away. Work stress. Fatigue. Life getting busy. That is what you tell yourself when you trust someone. You fill in the gaps with reasons that keep everything intact. I exhaled slowly and leaned back again, letting my head rest against the couch. The denial did not disappear all at once. It faded in layers. Each replay of that video peeled something back, stripping away another excuse, another possibility, until what was left was simple and clear. She was not where she said she was. She was not doing what she said she was doing. And whatever that moment represented, it was not new. It was just the first time I had seen it. I opened the video again, not because I needed confirmation anymore, but because I needed to understand what I was dealing with. Because the truth, once it shows itself, does not leave quietly. It stays, waiting for you to decide what you are going to do with it. I did not sleep that night. I turned off the lights, lay down in the same bed we had shared for over a decade, and stared at the ceiling as if it might give me something solid to hold on to. But all it gave me was time. Time to think. Time to replay everything, not just the video, but the years that came before it. Memory has a strange way of shifting when something breaks. Moments that once felt warm start to feel staged, like scenes you misunderstood the first time you saw them. I found myself going back to the beginning, not because I wanted to, but because my mind needed a reference point for what was real. I met Emily when I was 29. She was 27, sitting across from me in a small coffee shop that smelled like roasted beans and rain on concrete. She laughed easily back then, the kind of laugh that filled space without trying. I remember thinking how natural everything felt, like we were not forcing anything into place. We built our life slowly. No rush, no drama. Just two people moving forward in the same direction. Our first apartment was barely 800 square feet, thin walls, old carpet, a kitchen that always smelled faintly like whatever the previous tenant cooked. But it was ours. We sat on the floor the first night eating takeout because the furniture had not arrived yet, and she leaned against my shoulder and said, "This is enough." I believed her. For years I believed her. We moved into a house after 5 years, something modest in a quiet neighborhood where people waved when you drove by. Weekends were simple. Grocery runs, yard work, the occasional dinner with friends. Nothing extraordinary, but steady. Reliable. That is what I thought marriage was supposed to be. Not constant excitement, but consistency. Showing up, even on the days when nothing special was happening. Emily fit into that life seamlessly. She handled the details I did not think about. I handled the things that needed fixing. It was not perfect, but it worked. Or at least it looked like it did. Looking back now, I can see where the edges started to blur. Not in a dramatic way, not with some obvious turning point. It was gradual. Subtle shifts that were easy to overlook because they did not demand attention. Conversations became shorter. Not cold, just efficient. We talked about schedules, plans, responsibilities, but less about anything that required depth. Her phone became more present. Not in a way that raised alarms, just enough that it became part of the background. Something always within reach. I told myself that was normal. Everyone stays connected now. Work follows you home. Life gets busy. You adjust. That is what I did. I adjusted. I filled in the silence with assumptions that kept everything intact. Because the alternative would have required me to question something I was not ready to question. Lying there in the dark, I realized that nothing about what I saw in that video existed in isolation. It was not a single mistake suspended in time. It was connected to a pattern I had been living inside without fully seeing it. That realization did not hit all at once. It settled slowly, like dust after something collapses. And once it settled, it changed the way everything behind me looked. Not erased, not entirely false, but altered. Like I had been reading a story where the meaning shifted halfway through, and now every chapter before it carried a different weight. I turned my head slightly, looking at the empty side of the bed where she should have been. She was supposed to be out of town. That was the story I had accepted less than 24 hours ago. Now it felt distant, almost irrelevant. Because the truth was no longer something I was searching for. It was something I had already seen. And once you see it, you do not get to go back to the version of your life where it did not exist. By the time morning light started to creep through the blinds, I was no longer trying to convince myself it was nothing. That part was over. What replaced it was quieter, more deliberate. I got out of bed at the same time I always did, walked into the kitchen, and started the coffee maker like the day was going to follow the same routine it always had. The machine hummed, the smell filled the room, and for a moment everything looked normal. That was the strange part. Nothing in the environment had changed. The house was still the same. The walls, the furniture, the small details we had built together over the years. But the meaning behind it had shifted completely. I poured the coffee into a mug and leaned against the counter, letting the heat settle into my hands while my mind kept moving. I started thinking about the last few months, not as isolated memories, but as a sequence. Patterns instead of moments. And once I looked at it that way, things started to line up in a way they had not before. Emily had been traveling more. That was the explanation she gave. Conferences, client meetings, last minute schedule changes. It sounded reasonable at the time. Her job had always been demanding. I never questioned it because there was no reason to. But now, those trips felt different. Less like obligations and more like opportunities. I remembered how she would pack quickly, almost automatically, like she had done it 100 times before. The way she checked her phone constantly before leaving, responding to messages with a focus that did not match the casual tone she used with me. At the time, I thought it was work pressure. Now it looked like coordination. I took a sip of coffee and let that realization settle. It did not hit like a shock anymore. It was more like a quiet confirmation of something already understood. I walked into the living room and sat down, picking up my phone again, not to watch the video this time, but to start connecting details. I opened her social media profiles, scrolling through posts, photos, comments. On the surface, everything looked normal. Smiles, captions, the kind of curated life people present to the world. But I was not looking at it the way I used to. I was looking for inconsistencies. Small things that did not match the version of events she had given me. And they were there, subtle but clear once you knew where to look. A photo tagged at a location she never mentioned. A comment from someone I did not recognize, too familiar in tone. A pattern of interactions that repeated just enough to stand out. None of it was proof on its own. But together, it formed something harder to ignore. I leaned back, exhaling slowly, my eyes moving across the screen without really focusing on any one thing. The hardest part was not the discovery itself. It was the realization of how long it might have been happening without me seeing it. That the life I thought I was living had been running alongside another version I knew nothing about. I set the phone down and looked around the room again, this time not as a place of comfort, but as a space filled with unanswered questions. Because whatever this was, it was not contained to a single moment in a video. It had a structure, a timeline. And if I wanted to understand it, I needed to stop reacting to what I felt and start paying attention to what was actually there. Because the difference between being blindsided and taking control comes down to one thing. Whether you are willing to see the pattern for what it is, instead of what you hoped it would be. I did not rush anything. That was the first decision I made, even if I did not say it out loud. Rushing would have meant reacting, and reacting would have meant losing control. Instead, I sat there with a clear head and started treating it like a problem that needed to be understood, not confronted. I picked up my phone again and went back to the teenager's profile, this time with a purpose. I scrolled through his posts carefully, not just looking at the video, but everything around it. Photos, tags, comments, the kind of digital footprint people leave without thinking twice. The party showed up more than once. Different angles, different clips, all from the same night. I watched each one slowly, piecing together the environment like a map. The house was larger than I first thought, maybe 2 stories, with a wide backyard and a pool reflecting the string lights above it. There were at least 30 people there, maybe more, most of them younger, but a few stood out as older, more established, out of place in a way that made them easier to track. I paused on one frame where Emily appeared again, not close to the camera this time, but walking across the background with the same man from before. They were talking, close enough that their body language did not leave much room for interpretation. This was not a random moment. This was familiarity. I zoomed in on him as much as the resolution would allow. Mid-40s, maybe? Clean cut, dressed better than most of the people around him. Not a teenager, not part of that crowd. Which meant he had a reason to be there. I took a screenshot and saved it, then moved on to the comments under the video. Names. Tags. People joking, referencing the night, calling it a crazy party at someone's place. One name appeared more than once, tagged in multiple posts connected to that location. I tapped on it and opened the profile. The account belonged to a woman, early 20s. Judging by her photos, but the last name matched something that caught my attention immediately. It was not random. It was a last name I had heard before. I sat up slightly, my focus sharpening as the connection started to form. I searched it separately, outside of social media, and within seconds the pieces aligned. The house belonged to a family tied to a local business network, one that overlapped with Emily's industry more than I realized. This was not a coincidence. She had not ended up there by accident. She had access. A reason. I leaned back again, letting that settle. The distance between what I thought her world was and what it actually might be kept getting smaller. I opened her contact information on my phone, not to call, but to review. Her work email, her company details, everything I had ignored because I trusted it without question. Now I was looking at it differently, not as background information, but as a trail. Every piece of data meant something if you were willing to follow it far enough. I exhaled slowly and set the phone down for a moment, letting the silence return. This was no longer about a single video. It was a structure, a network of connections that had been sitting in plain sight while I chose not to see it. And the more I uncovered, the clearer one thing became. Whatever was happening had layers. And if I was going to deal with it, I needed to understand all of them before I made a single move. The more I looked, the less room there was for doubt. It was not just one video, not just one moment caught by accident. It was a pattern repeating itself in fragments across different angles, different posts, different timestamps that all pointed to the same conclusion. I went back to the second clip I had saved and let it play without interruption this time, forcing myself to watch everything instead of focusing on one detail. The camera drifted across the backyard, past the pool, over clusters of people talking, laughing, moving without awareness of being observed. Then it settled briefly near a table where drinks were lined up, and there they were again. Emily and the same man, standing closer now, not touching this time, but the space between them carried the same familiarity. He leaned in slightly as he spoke, and she smiled in a way I had not seen directed at me in a long time. Not polite, not routine. Something else. Something lighter. I paused the video and felt that quiet shift inside me settle into something firmer. This was not confusion anymore. This was confirmation. I moved on to the next post, another angle from later that night. The lighting was dimmer, the crowd thinner, the energy of the party winding down. And again, they appeared. This time leaving together, walking toward the side of the house, away from the main group. No urgency, no hesitation. Just a natural transition, like it was already understood between them where they were going. I did not need to see what happened after that. The implication was clear enough, and more importantly, consistent with everything else I had already seen. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath, not because I was overwhelmed, but because the last piece had just fallen into place. The part of me that had been holding on to the possibility of a misunderstanding finally let go. What replaced it was something quieter, more controlled. A kind of clarity that does not come from emotion, but from certainty. I picked up my phone again and went back to the man's image, the clearest frame I could find. I studied his face more carefully this time, not just as a stranger, but as someone who had crossed into my life without my knowledge. There was something familiar about him, not directly, but in a way that suggested proximity. Not a random encounter, not a one-time coincidence. Someone within range. I opened my laptop and started searching more deliberately, combining the last name I had found with professional directories, company pages, anything that could narrow it down. It did not take long. The connection surfaced in less than 5 minutes, sitting there like it had been waiting for me to notice it. His name was attached to a consulting firm that worked with multiple companies in the same sector as Emily's. Not just overlap. Regular interaction. Meetings. Events. Opportunities. I sat back and let that sink in fully. This was not something that started at that party. That was just where it was visible. Whatever existed between them had roots somewhere else, somewhere structured, somewhere planned. I closed the laptop slowly and rested my hands on the table, staring at nothing in particular. The truth had moved past suspicion, past discovery, into something solid enough to act on. And the strangest part was not the anger people would expect. It was the absence of it. Because once everything aligns, once the confusion is gone, what you are left with is not chaos. It is direction. And for the first time since I pressed play on that video, I knew exactly where this was going. I did not confront her when she came home. That was the part most people would expect, the explosion, the questions, the demand for answers. But by the time Emily walked through that door, I already had something more valuable than answers. I had clarity. And clarity does not need to shout to be effective. She arrived just after 6 in the evening, rolling her suitcase behind her like nothing had shifted. Her expression was the same as always, composed, slightly tired, the kind of look someone wears after a long trip. She smiled when she saw me, stepped closer, and leaned in for a quick kiss on the cheek, routine and effortless. I let it happen. Not because I accepted it, but because I was no longer reacting to surface actions. I was observing. "How was the trip?" I asked, my voice steady even. She exhaled softly and set her bag down. "Long meetings ran late. I am glad to be home." The words came out clean, practiced, without hesitation. If I had not seen what I saw, I would have believed every part of it. That was the unsettling realization. She moved through the house like she always did, placing her keys on the counter, checking her phone, asking if I had eaten. Every action fit the version of reality she was maintaining. And for the first time, I saw it not as normal behavior, but as performance. Not exaggerated, not dramatic. Controlled. Consistent. Effective. I nodded where appropriate, answered her questions with the same level tone, keeping everything aligned on the surface while something entirely different was taking shape underneath. Because this was not the moment to reveal anything. This was the moment to confirm how far the gap between truth and presentation actually went. Over the next hour, I watched carefully. The way she handled her phone, the timing of her responses, the small pauses before certain answers. None of it would stand out to someone who was not looking for it. But once you know what to look for, the details become impossible to ignore. She mentioned the city she claimed to be in again, adding small specifics, reinforcing the story without being prompted. That told me everything I needed to know. This was not a mistake she was trying to cover. This was a narrative she had already built and was comfortable maintaining. I sat across from her at the dinner table, listening, nodding, letting her speak while my mind stayed 2 steps ahead. Because the situation had shifted. This was no longer about discovering what happened. That part was done. This was about control. About timing. About making sure that when the truth surfaced, it would not be a conversation. It would be a conclusion. I finished my meal, set the fork down quietly, and looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. She met my gaze without hesitation, calm, unaware, completely inside the version of reality she believed was intact. And that was the final confirmation I needed. Not from evidence, not from video, not from digital traces. From her. Because the strongest advantage you can have in a situation like this is not anger. It is information. And the fact that she had no idea I already had it meant one thing. The next move was entirely mine. The next morning, I did not rush out of the house or make any dramatic moves. I followed my routine with the same precision I had always used, but this time every action had a purpose behind it. I left for work at the usual time, drove the same route, parked in the same spot, and walked into the building like nothing had changed. On the surface, everything was identical. Underneath, everything was different. Because while Emily believed the story was still intact, I had already stepped outside of it. Around noon, I stepped away from my desk and made a call I had never thought I would need to make. The lawyer's office was quiet, efficient, the kind of place where conversations stay controlled and focused. I did not over-explain. I laid out the facts clearly, without emotion, without speculation. Evidence, timeline, financial structure. The response on the other end was just as calm. We set a meeting for later that afternoon. No hesitation. No delay. By the time I walked into that office, I was not there to ask what I should do. I was there to confirm how to do it correctly. We went through everything step by step. Accounts, property, documentation, the legal framework that would define what came next. I handed over the screenshots, the saved clips, the details I had collected. Not as accusations, but as information. Structured. Organized. Useful. The lawyer nodded once, then started outlining the process with a clarity that matched my own. When I walked out of that building, I was not carrying uncertainty anymore. I was carrying a plan. That evening, I came home at the same time as always. Emily was already there, sitting at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone, completely at ease. She looked up, smiled, asked how my day was. I answered in the same tone she expected, steady, unremarkable. Dinner happened the same way it always did. Conversation, small details, nothing out of place. If someone had walked in at that moment, they would have seen a normal couple, living a normal life. That was the illusion she was still operating inside. After we finished eating, I stood up, walked into the living room, and picked up my phone. Not in a rush, not with tension, just with intention. I walked back to the table and set the phone down in front of her, screen facing up. The video was already paused at the frame that mattered. I did not say anything right away. I just looked at her, giving her the space to see it on her own terms. It took a second. Maybe two. Her eyes moved from me to the screen, then back again, then settled on the image. I watched the exact moment the understanding hit. It was subtle. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a shift. A break in the expression she had maintained so carefully. She did not speak immediately. Neither did I. The silence stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. It was final. "You told me you were out of town," I said, my voice even, controlled. Not accusatory. Not emotional. Just factual. She opened her mouth slightly, then closed it again, searching for something to say that would fit into a story that no longer held together. But there was no version of this that worked anymore. Not with what was sitting between us. I leaned back slightly, keeping my gaze steady. "I have already spoken to a lawyer," I added, just enough to shift the weight of the moment. Not a threat. Not a reaction. A conclusion. That was the difference. She looked at me again, really looked this time, and whatever she saw in my expression must have told her everything she needed to know. Because the conversation she might have prepared for was not going to happen. There was no argument to win, no explanation that could reset what had already been decided. And for the first time since all of this started, I felt something settle completely. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Just control. Because the truth had already done its work. And now, Everything else would follow exactly where it led.